I know this is going to be a few days behind the times, speaking about the tragic school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. But anybody who's ever had a computer crash will understand that it takes you a couple of days at least to get your life back together. And I'm working with less than my usual editing software. That having been said, there were two things that became very clear with that shooting. The first thing was the response of the Uvalde Police Department, or should we say lack thereof. When it took a essentially SWAT team from the Border Patrol to go in there and end the situation. And as the crow flies, Uvalde is 60 miles from the border. So it's safe to say that they had a bit of a drive. When asked why the local police didn't go into the building, the lieutenant for the department, who is their general spokesman, and later was backed up by the chief of police, saying, well, they waited because they didn't know where the shooter was and they were afraid of getting shot. The general motto of police in the United States, and love or hate the LAPD, it's plastered on the side of every patrol car there: to protect and serve. And some version of that is on most police cars around the country. So for the officers to say they were afraid of getting shot, well, I understand that. But probably 40 years ago, 30 anyways, here in Columbus, on the west side where I live, there was a man who was in, let's say, a mental health crisis. His mother called the police on him. From her home, he was trying to get in the back door with carrying a katana, a samurai sword. And she could tell by the look on his face, his behavior, and the way he was swinging the sword around that he was a danger to himself and others. Two police officers showed up, which was pure luck because there was a major incident going on just outside of downtown on the west side that day. And they approached the man. They tried to talk him down, get him to put the sword down, and they approached slowly. And when he let out a yell and charged at them, they shot him. He was dead. Some people asked the chief of police, who was Earl Burden at the time, why didn't the officers try to disarm him? And Chief Burden's answer was, I don't pay my patrolmen to be superheroes. I pay them to enforce the law and, with some luck, go home at the end of the day to their families. They didn't have to approach him. They could have stood back at the end of the driveway and just shot. Instead, they drew closer to him, making a calculated judgment that if he did try to attack them and kill them, that they could save their lives first, which is what they did. For a group of policemen to stand outside of school as a hostage situation and shooting is going on because they are afraid that they might get hurt is unconscionable. Seeing that the police weren't doing anything, some parents felt that they had to do something. So they themselves tried to rush the school, willing to put their unarmed, unbulletproof vests lives on the line to save their children, instead of doing what needed to be done and going in to end the situation. The Uvalde Police Department, police officers instead tackled the parents, preventing them from going in, which honestly was the right thing to do. But then they also handcuffed them and arrested them for interfering with official business. There was no official business going on. There were a bunch of cowards standing there waiting for somebody else to do their job for them. That's pathetic. Every one of those officers should be fired and forbidden from ever being a police officer anywhere in the world again. They don't deserve the title. The other thing, though, that comes up from this, and has been known for years, decades even, that with the exception of a few shootings, workplace shootings that have gone on, which involve love triangles, you find out that you and your wife work in the same place, and she's doing the dirty with the supervisor who gives you crappy jobs to keep you out of sight, out of mind. Well, I'm not going to say I approve or that it's completely understandable, but these usually amount to double murder and a suicide. And there was a reason that could be explainable as to why those incidents happen. But for all the other mass shootings, workplace shootings, school shootings, one thing has been known. But nobody wants to do anything about it, is that when they look back at these people that commit these crimes, some of them, like the shooter in Buffalo, were taken alive. My personal opinion, it's a damn shame he was taken alive, but that's just my opinion. And we all know what opinions are. But they go back and they look at these people, they look into their backgrounds. If they didn't survive, like this young man in Texas, or they did survive and live to be questioned, and it becomes fairly clear that some of these people, almost all of them, had mental health problems. Some of them serious mental health problems. One from a post office shooting here in Columbus, the man was actually found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was very, very insane. But everyone says, oh, the evil in the world. Let's not call it evil. Let's call it what it is. It's a mental health issue. It's easy for us to say, oh, that was evil, that was terrible, it was evil. Because that takes the responsibility away from the community, away from the government. Israel and Switzerland, a friend mentioned to me, have very in compulsory military service, men and women. And they take their weapons home with them. But they don't have a lot of mass shootings, even though they are some of the most heavily armed populaces in the world. And the reason is really pretty simple. They have robust mental health systems. They have removed the stigma of saying my son, cousin, daughter, husband, wife is mentally ill and needs to be committed for their safety and the safety of others. So here we call it evil. We don't call it what it is, mental health crisis. And it's cheap. It's very cheap to call it evil. Because to admit that we have a mental health crisis means that community mental health services in many ways have failed in what they were meant to do when they came into being in the 70s and 80s. And it's allowing really dangerous people to live among us, and unless you have been, I think the term is, adjudicated incompetent by a judge, no matter how insane you are, you can go buy a gun. And as many as you want, as many as you can afford. Because we'd rather say that so-and-so was evil than admit that as a community, as a country, we have failed in protecting the most vulnerable from those who need help the most. The day I graduated college in 2012 was also the day of the Sandy Hook shooting. And that young man's mother had done everything right by the book with securing her firearms, doing her level best to keep them away from him. And nobody wants to talk about, they want to talk about the kids that were killed, and rightfully so. They never want to talk about the fact that first, he took a knife and he stabbed his mother. He killed her. Then, he got a hold of weapons that she had permits for that were locked up in a gun safe. And, well, anybody who's ever used an at-home safe knows that you're going to keep the combination around somewhere because you're almost certainly going to forget it. And then when you do, it's an even bigger hassle to hire someone out and come and open the safe and then rebuild the safe because you just probably had to draw all the tumblers out. He was able to get into her safe. That's where he got the weapons that he used to kill those children. The reason she had what she believed to be a robust method of keeping her guns out of his hands was because she knew he had mental health problems. He was the last person that should have a gun. But she also assumed that he would never kill her to get those weapons. But he did. And the rest is history. Very sad history. If we don't address the fact that in many ways community mental health has failed in protecting some of us from those who go around the bend, there's still going to be more shootings. My children are in their 30s now. My children have been around guns since they were 5 years old. They knew right where the gun safe was. Rarely ever locked it. Some would say that's irresponsible on my part. The fact is that my kids knew that guns were tools. And that's all they are, they're tools. And you don't use the wrong tool for the job. So they never got into the gun safes. They never, even when they had BB guns of their own, they didn't go out just shooting at things in the neighborhood. They waited till we could take them to a range somewhere that they could safely shoot. That is responsible parenting. We had one son who's autistic, and he eventually had to go into a group home. But during the time that he was home and we knew he had problems, we did keep that safe locked. Because he didn't understand. His world revolved around Pokemon and anime, and that's how he believed the world worked. So we knew have him around a loaded gun was just asking for trouble. Until we do something to convince those who have taken an oath to protect and serve to actually do their job when it needs to be done, even at risk to their own life, we will still have these situations happening because we as a people, as a government, don't want to spend the money to reopen places like the Lima Hospital for the criminally insane, where people with mental health problems that would make them a danger to themselves and others could be kept segregated from the rest of society. Until those two things are fixed, it's just more of the same. And that is a damn shame.